Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about Star Fox, our final hope in Star Fox for Nintendo Switch 2. Yes, I believe that Star Fox is still coming to Nintendo Switch 2, and I do not think it is far away. I still think that June release date that's been reported by several sources is still likely the time this game is coming out, even though, up to this point, and this is the last day in the month of April, it was said to be revealed in this month and it hasn't happened yet, which is leading a lot of people to believe it's fake information, it's not real, it's a bogus rumor. I don't actually think that's what's going on, but we're going to be talking about what may be going on, and I'll be explaining to you why I still believe Star Fox is happening. So if you've been following the channel lately, you likely already know that multiple parties have already reported on this Star Fox project to come out soon. Nate the Hate, who perhaps has the most notoriety, but also Video Games Chronicle, has also corroborated this information. We've mentioned Nash Weedle was teasing it beforehand as well, and even this French journalist, Oscar Lemaire. But as we were getting close to the end of the month, more and more people were continually asking Nate the Hate about this Star Fox project because it was not announced yet. He initially said he heard it would be announced in the month of April to come out early on this summer. And each time Nate responded, he said this is still what he's heard. He provided no updates suggesting a change. But this past weekend, as we mentioned a few days ago in an earlier video, he says he has zero doubts in the Star Fox project. Even just a few days ago, when a lot of people were starting to grow skeptical because we have Golden Week this week where there's holidays in Japan, leading people to think that Nintendo will be making less announcements in this week like they would in other weeks. And even then, he still said he has zero doubt in this project. He believes it's happening, and reminds people that there were other things he reported on in his recent podcast that have already come to fruition, such as Splatoon Raiders coming out in July, which is what we expected based off what he said. And there was no indication beforehand that Splatoon Raiders would be coming out then. All that happened after Nate the Hate put out his podcast revealing this information, we saw ratings for Splatoon Raiders and Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, another game he said it will be coming out in the summer as well. And so there is some concrete information. There have been things that Nate the Hate has reported on within the same podcast that have already been confirmed. The Star Fox thing has yet to have been confirmed, and at this point it looks like the reveal time of it happening in April is not going to pan out unless they do it later today, which would be surprising, but stranger things have happened. But someone else has come up publicly to support this Star Fox information. Negro Felipe from Universal Nintendo, another journalist. I'm gonna stick my neck out for free. The game exists. I received proof from an absurdly reliable source. I think Nate's sin was giving an announcement window for it. I've made that mistake in the past and got burned because of a week. Patience, gentlemen. And I find this extremely interesting. He received proof from an absurdly reliable source. I wonder what that means. Has Necro seen actual gameplay for this title? Has Necro seen like promotional art or something like that? Something that you would look at and you'd be like, yep, that's official, that's the real thing. And from a source he would say is absurdly reliable. I find it extremely interesting that he would say this, and I'm very curious on what he saw. But this is just one more person that has publicly put out there that this Star Fox project is indeed real. And something I feel I've also talked about on this channel a lot is that when it comes to information that has not been officially confirmed, there is a lot of fluidity. Things can move around and can be changed. And so it's another reason to take things with a grain of salt. Now, some people will say, well, that's just convenient. You'll report on information and then just say, oh, plans changed. But there's a key thing to consider here. You look at the track record, the continued history, and you wait to see what will happen. So Nate the Hate, Video Games Chronicle, considered to be reputable sources by many because they have a history of correctness. That is not to say they get everything right. They do not. No one does, to be clear. But if you look at the big picture, most of the time, their information proves to be valid. And this situation somewhat reminds me of what happened early last year. Because Nate had said a Switch 2 reveal is happening soon, and on the day that Donkey Kong Country Returns HD would be coming out, and many people doubted this would be happening because a game would be coming out then, but Nate was very confident, and what happened? Yeah, the reveal happened the same day a game came out from Nintendo. People thought that that had to mean that there wouldn't be a reveal, but the reality of the situation is, the announcement and that release both happened on the same day. And Nate remained confident about this, even though many people were very doubtful. And so going back to what Nate said, Nate Drake on Reset Era, but same person, he has zero doubt on the project. He's not walking back on it, he's not concerned. He did indicate that maybe there's a slight marketing pivot here in terms of the timeline, and I do think we could be looking at a very quick turnaround here, which is surprising. But the point is, all these people believe the game is real, and they're not all of a sudden doubting it because it hasn't been announced yet, even though the initial expectation was a reveal in April. Now, a few days ago, I put out a list showing off the history of June releases from Nintendo, published titles in June. And I only looked back at the last 10 years, but in the last 10 years, Nintendo has made sure to publish something in June every single time. But I decided to just add a little bit more to the list. I looked a little bit further, and there has always been something in June. I only went back to June 2009 here, but even looking further, there's always something. When you go further back, Nintendo had less worldwide releases. A lot of things are coming out in different regions, and they had other platforms to worry about, so you had DS, DSi, Wii, all that stuff. But looking through the history, June is an extremely consistent time for Nintendo to publish games. And so currently, there's nothing announced for June yet. I don't think this is going to be the first time, and I don't know how long, that Nintendo will not have at least one published title in June. There might be more. Even if it does seem like an extremely quick turnaround here. And yes, maybe it's not Star Fox, maybe it's something else. But of all the announced things, there really isn't anything announced that would make sense to come out in June. Maybe Nintendo could turn around and be like, hey, surprise, Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave is coming out in June, even though we gave you Splatoon Raiders information first. That's possible. I feel like most people agree that seems unlikely. Another possibility could maybe be that Nintendo playtest program that they've playtested a couple times but haven't given an actual announcement for. Maybe that is suddenly shadow dropped in June. That's another possibility. But regardless, I am left to think that Nintendo does need to make at least one more announcement for a game to come out in June, and there's a solid chance it could even be more than that. Maybe another surprise Nintendo Switch 2 edition, for example. But there's a little bit more to dive into here, because there has been this other person that has apparently said some things about this Star Fox title. This French journalist, Oscar Lemaire. And here you see on Reset Era, Tailbull says, yeah, Oscar is definitely reliable. Just to be clear, he said something about a small multiplayer Star Fox spin-off, a bit different about what you said heard. Nate responds, all I've ever said is, classic style, online multiplayer, and visually good. So, from what Nate has said about this project, it doesn't really lead you to believe that this would be a small multiplayer spin-off. By the way, I've heard this is wrong, we'll be getting to that in a moment here. But just thinking about it, a Star Fox title that has online multiplayer that is visually good, that's in the classic style, I don't see how that could just be like a smallish title. I mean, maybe you don't consider it like a giant megaton, but I'm just thinking about par for the course from what we would expect of a Star Fox title, a proper mainline Star Fox title. Even VGC said they had heard in a podcast that it's supposed to be funny. If this is just like a multiplayer spin-off thing, then where's the room for all the dialogue and banter, suggesting a good narrative in an actual Star Fox campaign? So it seems like something might be a bit off here. But taking a closer look, trying to find the actual source for what Oscar Lemaire said, surprise, surprise, most people are just sharing around the information without actually having the source, which is really annoying, I gotta say. Like, you look here, My Nintendo News reported about what Lemaire had said, and just for the record, Oscar here responded to this because someone shared it to him on Blue Sky, and when you translate it, it just says, I'm tired. which I believe implies he's tired of just articles like this that are portraying things very incorrectly. But I actually did eventually find where this source came from, and it was from him live streaming on Twitch. Now, it's in French. I do not understand French. There will be a link in the description because I do share sources about things that are being talked about, unlike apparently a whole bunch of other outlets out there. However, there is this Reddit post, Alpha SSB, who apparently understands what was said in this live stream and tells us what Lemaire actually heard. What Lemaire actually heard was that he was told there is a multiplayer focus. He speculated that the game might be some kind of spin-off because he heard of the multiplayer focus. He was not told it was a small spin-off. That was speculation, it was conversation during the live stream. What he heard is that there's a multiplayer focus, which is the same thing that Nate the Hate heard, that there's a big online multiplayer. So it's just really interesting how people choose to misinterpret things and then spread that, do not share the sources, and make that out to be the story. Now again, I'm operating under the assumption that what these people have understood from the live stream is accurate. I can't speak French. You can listen to it for yourself if you do understand French to confirm this. I would appreciate it if you could. But Truno here on Reset Era also provides some bullet points on what Lemaire has been saying. Lemaire said no major title for 2026 from Nintendo, but there will be a Zelda game this year. They have no idea what it'll be. These two things seem very conflicting. Now, maybe it's a minor Zelda title, but if it's the Ocarina of Time remake, as has been reported by multiple outlets, which would be a Zelda title, I don't know how you don't consider that to be a major title. This reminds me of when VGC, Andy Robinson from VGC, had said he heard there would be no major titles for Switch until Metroid Prime 4 after the release of Tears of the Kingdom. That statement suggests that you think Metroid Prime 4 is a major title, but Metroid historically from a sales perspective is not a major title, right? However, from perhaps an ambition perspective, from a scope perspective, you could look at it as more of an ambitious title. But there were other titles that came out in between Tears of the Kingdom and Metroid Prime 4, such as Pikmin 4, such as Mario Wonder. Then you wait a little bit, the Switch 2 comes out, Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and then later into 2025, Metroid Prime 4 came out. So there were several titles that I would put under the major category for me that also sold many millions. This is not the same person here, but I just think it's interesting how things can be left up for interpretation here. Maybe someone like Oscar doesn't consider a remake to be a big deal, but if it's a big deal remake, then wouldn't it be? And also, if we are getting this Star Fox title, to me, that is a big deal. That's about as big of a deal as Metroid Prime 4. Perhaps it has even greater sales potential. Maybe it's better to compare it more so to something like Donkey Kong Bonanza. These are all big deals. But to continue here, no 3D Mario for 2026. They also don't know if it'll come out in 2027. Nate the Hate and also Video Games Chronicle have recently heard that Mario will not make it out for 2026, but suggest 2027. The last bullet here, because Star Fox has been described to them as a multiplayer experience, they speculate it's a spin-off. So this is in line with that Reddit post we just mentioned. Considering how light this year has already been, in my opinion, and that this is early on to the Switch 2 era, and even if it wasn't early on to the Switch 2 era, sales need to be made. The notion that there's no major titles from Nintendo in 2026, I find extremely hard to believe. And as I said earlier, we've heard comments like this before, and there have been several major titles that would dispute that. So I'm not really too concerned about what's being said here by Oscar. If anything, it's one more person that's saying that there is a Star Fox title coming that has a multiplayer focus, which I actually think could be a really big deal. That doesn't mean there isn't a campaign. That doesn't mean there isn't like a Star Fox single player as we have seen in prior games, but it could be, perhaps, as we theorize, something where you go back and replay, unlock different characters or vehicles or weapons or accessories to use in the multiplayer, so you're going back and forth between the two. Maybe even, and I've been really pulling for this, we'll see, there's cooperative play with the single player as well, where you can join up with an entire team of 4 people playing through the campaign. That would be a multiplayer focus, but also still be a single player campaign, and then also you still have online death matches or whatever it is they decide to do. We do not know. But I do think something is absolutely going to be announced to come out in June. I do not think Nintendo's going to go the rest of the year without any quote-unquote major titles. There are going to be major titles. Maybe those major titles aren't going to sell 30 million copies, but most games don't sell 30 million copies. But are they going to be games we're going to like? I would think so. This first half of the year has been very casual focused, and I'm anticipating that this second half of the year is going to have more of a core focus. This is what a lot of us have been waiting for. We just gotta be patient. I know it's been tough, but hey, life happens. Here we are. Things are coming. Stay tuned. But I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.